Shout out to Ring RQ, Julius, you legend. We're going to do a joint interview, yeah? Yeah, we'll do a joint interview, Julius. Thanks for the support. You're a legend. From your girls, Raven and Ellie.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. Bob Arum expects Naoya Inoue to pursue undisputed goal at 122 pounds.
I think most of us do.
There's been a lot of talk centered around Naoya Inoue's newfound WBO Super Championship status, and how that will, in effect, affect the reign of Stephen Fulton as WBO Super Bantamweight Champion.
But irrespective of that same old conversation,
I think he's gonna decide to vacate the bantamweight titles. He has all four of them. And move up to 122 pounds. Each champion there has two of the titles. So his goal is to not only to win the 122-pound title, but to unify it. I don't see anybody beating this guy. He boxes beautifully, and he's a concussive puncher, especially at his weight.
Irrespective of promotion by way of name association, clout chasing, Stephen Fulton effectively moving up from super bantamweight up to featherweight for a rematch that no one was really asking for. Irrespective of that same old conversation, we must now address the proposition of how Naoya Inoue will do as a super bantamweight.
Given his age, his boxing acumen, and his concussive power, I'd say that I think Naoya Inoue will still be a big puncher at 122 pounds.
I don't think any fighter, I don't think any boxer is invincible. It's possible that he may lose something on the way up.
He might. This will be his fourth weight class, his fourth division.
We have to see. Naoya Inoue wasn't the biggest bantamweight. He certainly won't be the biggest super bantamweight. There's that to consider.
But I do think he'll carry up enough of his power that he'll still be a decent-sized puncher. He'll still be able to get respect. Unless we forget, Naoya Inoue isn't in love with his power.
He's not a brawler. He's not a bruiser. He's not a guy who goes out there throwing punches for the sake of throwing punches. One of Naoya Inoue's standout qualities is how accurate and efficient he is.
He doesn't waste punches.
Given his newfound WBO Super Champion status, it's conceivable that upon moving up, that is the first title that he's going to shoot for. And ranked at number one by way of the WBO at Super Bantamweight is America's own Reese Aleem. Might be familiar with that name. A few weeks ago, he was in hot pursuit of a fight with Stephen Fulton, but Stephen wouldn't give him the time of day.
Most people, at least by now, they're not expecting Stephen to share the ring with Naoya Inoue. They're expecting him to vacate the brown belt.
They expect that the title will be forfeit in the very near future, and if it is, Naoya Inoue may end up opposite the ring Reese Aleem or Mexico's own Luis Neri.
Could end up being one of those two guys. We'll see which one. Reese Aleem was last in action on the undercard of Andy Ruiz versus Luis Ortiz.
Reese Aleem has been fighting on the undercards of PBC shows for his last couple of fights, so it's more or less safe to say that he, like Stephen Fulton, is a PBC fighter. Is that going to be a problem when the time comes? Unbeaten Reese Aleem, who sports a professional record of 20 wins, no losses, no draws,
12 knockouts.
Via his WBO Super Champion status, he's already the mandatory challenger by way of the WBO. But you have to question what happens if Stephen vacates the brown belt. What will the WBO elect to do then? It's conceivable he may end up fighting the highest ranked available contender in the WBO's ranked standings. And right now, that's Reese Aleem. Right behind Reese Aleem is former WBC bantamweight champion,
former two-division champion Luis Neri of Mexico.
Luis Neri, after those two Yamanaka fights, after testing positive for clenbuterol in the first fight, after the first fight, and blowing the weight ahead of the second, he was effectively banned from boxing in Japan, in the land of the rising sun. I think that poses some challenges.
That might. If they wanted to do a fight between Naoya Inoue and Luis Neri, they might have to do it here in the US of A, and that's assuming that network and promotional politics don't play a factor as well. Luis Neri, south of the border, he's a zen for promotions fighter.
And he was last in action south of the border earlier this year in October, opposite the ring David Carmona, who he stopped in 3 rounds.
That wasn't a PBC show either. That was a Zen for Promotions show. It wasn't even shown on Showtime. But before that, Luis Nery was boxing on PBC shows.
It appears that the top two guys in the WBO's current rank standings, Reece Salim and Luis Nery, they do have some association with the PBC. Is that going to be a problem when the time comes? Is that going to be a problem upon Naoya Inoue's ascent to the super bantamweight division next year?
Because those are the top two guys.
Based on how the ranks look right now. That could change several months down the line, and several months down the line, the number one and number two guys might be two very different people.
Let's not forget that Stephen Fulton is in possession of 2 alphabet titles at super bantamweight, not just one. He's got the WBO, we just talked about that, but he's also got the WBC.
Question as to whether or not Stephen Fulton would decide to vacate both titles simultaneously upon his ascent to the featherweight division ahead of what's supposed to be that Brandon Figueroa rematch. Does he end up vacating both titles?
If he does, by way of the WBC, ranked at number 1 is Luis Nery, who we just talked about. Ranked right behind him is Azat Havanesian of Armenia.
Sports professional record of 21 wins with 3 losses, no draws.
17 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 24 professional contests. 24 professional bouts. This could become a person of interest in the coming year if the WBC title is vacated by Stephen Fulton.
It all depends on how he plays it. When Naoya Inoue comes a-knocking by way of the WBO, most people feel that Stephen is going to drop that belt. He might drop it immediately, or he might drop it beforehand, because we all know what's about to happen.
Might drop it preemptively.
But he might hang on to the WBC title. I know of no special privileges Naoya Inoue has with the WBC, with the World Boxing Council. Would seem that should Stephen Fulton vacate both titles simultaneously, Luis Nery and Azat Havanesian may end up fighting for a newly vacated WBC title, at which point the conversation could quickly become Naoya Inoue versus the winner of that fight.
And if the winner of that fight is Luis Nery, and Luis Nery has any association whatsoever with the PBC, there could be a problem.
He's still a Zanfer Promotions fighter, and Zanfer does do a lot of business with Top Rank.
Though we're getting way ahead of ourselves. Stephen hasn't vacated either of his 2 titles at super bantamweight. Thus, Luis Nery hasn't fought for them yet, so maybe we ain't even got to worry about that guy.
Perhaps we won't have to. That is the current lay of the land at 122 pounds.
Naoya Inoue may be WBO super champion.
But today's super bantamweight division is a more political division than it used to be. In men's junior middleweight news, I'm sure most of you have heard by now that Charlo breaks left hand in camp. Tszyu defense has been postponed.
That sucks.
Serious implications in association with this now canceled mandated title defense. You wonder if it's even going to happen.
After landing a punch and sparring at his gym in Houston on Tuesday, after visiting 2 doctors and a hand specialist in Houston, his hand has been placed in a cast.
And it will remain in a cast for 2 months. And after it is removed, he will begin rehabilitation before resuming his training.
Sounds a lot like a year layoff.
A year in between Charlo's last fight, opposite the ring Brian Castano, their rematch, and what is to be his next fight, whenever that takes place.
Looks like he's going to be out for more than a year.
I was sparring, and I threw this nice punch, and as soon as it landed, I knew something was wrong. I felt my hand throbbing right away, said Charlo. I had 2 x-rays and an MRI to see what was wrong. It showed it was broken in 2 places. I hate this feeling. My hand will be in a cast for 2 months. I'm as disappointed as the fans, maybe more, because this was my first chance to defend the undisputed title. The way I am, I would have beaten Tszyu with 1 hand, but the doctors and the boxing commission won't allow that. It's even more dangerous when a lion faces adversity and has to come back to defend the pride. I've been training since July, and I've been hitting harder than ever, and these are the things that happen when you push yourself to the limits. After my hand heals, I'm coming back stronger than ever to defend my legacy. This is not the news that anyone wants to hear, because we've been anticipating this fight, but these things happen, said Tom Brown, president of TGB Promotions. Jermell didn't take the easy route to become the undisputed super welterweight champion, so he knows that nothing comes easy. Tszyu better be ready, because Jermell will be stronger and hungrier than ever.
That's assuming this fight even happens. There's a chance that it doesn't.
He's gonna have his hand in a cast for 2 months, and then, after the cast comes off, he's got to rehabilitate that hand.
I don't think we're going to be seeing this guy for a while.
Charlo versus Tszyu for the undisputed super welterweight title is one of the biggest and most anticipated fights on the 2023 boxing schedule. So we, like boxing fans around the world, are obviously disappointed to hear of Jermel's injury, and the resulting postponement, said Stefan Espinoza, president of Sports and Event Programming, Showtime Networks, Inc. We wish Jermel a speedy recovery, and we look forward to adding this important fight back to the Showtime schedule as soon as reasonably possible. We know both Jermel and Tim are anxious to give the boxing fans all the action.
Do you see how dealing with the PBC affects a fighter's schedule?
Tim used to be a very active fighter, but ever since he linked up with the PBC, not anymore. Tim Tszyu, who says, I'm very disappointed. I felt like the stars aligned for Undisputed, but we move on.
You better. You're still young.
You've let these people squander enough of your time.
As stated, I felt like the stars aligned for Undisputed, but we move on. I'm ready to take on the next mandatory challenger. I'll be back for Charlo once he is ready and healed.
Tim Tszyu may end up defending his interim status by way of the WBO against the next highest ranked contender, and the next highest ranked contender just so happens to be Liam Beefy Smith. But we know that Liam, he's spoken for. He's supposed to be fighting Chris Eubank Jr. early next year on Sky.
Ranked behind Liam Smith is former WBC champion Tony Harrison.
Given that Tony Harrison is a PBC fighter and that Tim Tszyu does have some association with the PBC, I could see a fight between Tim and Tony happening just as easily as I could see a fight between Tony and Sebastian Fundora.
Yeah, I could see Harrison versus Fundora happening as well.
It all depends on which direction Tony Harrison decides to go. Ranked behind Tony Harrison is Russia's own Bakram Murtazalia. Bakram, who just so happens to already be the mandatory challenger by way of the IBF as of 2019. That's how long that guy's been in the queue.
Tim needs to get out there. He needs to hit the ground running, make up for lost time.
There is currently no new date for the rescheduled match. A new date will be announced soon. A new date that likely doesn't involve Jermel Charlo, who's going to be out for a while. He's going to be out for months.
I just get the sense the fight between Tim and Jermel, it's not going to happen.
He's got 2 mandatories outstanding. 2 mandatories that we know of. Tim Tszyu and Bakram Murtazalia.
Don't forget that he's undisputed champion and he has all the belts. Thus, he has all the responsibility. We don't know how long he's going to be sidetracked with this injury, though. You will notice that the IBF weren't Johnny on the spot to strip him the same way they were Johnny on the spot to strip Joe Cordina after he suffered a hand injury.
Now do you see what I mean? Now do you see what I'm talking about? When a PBC fighter is injured and they're out for a while, whether it's Errol Spence Jr. or Jermel Charlo, even with a mandatory outstanding, one that's been in the queue for years now.
The IBF gives him leeway. The IBF gives him preferential treatment. But when it's a matchroom fighter that suffers an injury and they can't satisfy their mandatory, what do? They strip him, like they stripped Joe Cordina.
They might very well be Johnny on the spot with everybody else's fighters with different promotional outfits that fight on different platforms. But when it comes to PBC fighters, they take exception. They get special exemptions.
What's going on there?
A part of me feels like we might be looking at the end of Jermel Charlo's campaign at junior middleweight. A part of me feels like, given the amount of time that he's set to be out, and whenever he ends up coming back, he's going to need a tune-up fight.
Jermel Charlo's last fight was in May of this year.
His very next fight could be in May or further out.
Because his hand is going to be under a cast for the next 2 months, and after the cast comes off, then rehabilitation starts. It's not like he's back to normal.
Not in a jiffy, not right away. Tim Tszyu will likely see action before Jermel Charlo returns.
Sounds like it.
I don't think this fight is going to happen. I don't think Tim Tszyu versus Jermel Charlo is going to happen based on what's going on. First Tim got hurt, then Jermel got hurt.
Errol Spence still hiding under Al Heyman's skirt.
But you get the gist of it. It just doesn't coalesce. These schedules, they don't align. And Jermel Charlo, he's been at junior middleweight for quite some time. We could very well be looking at the end of his junior middleweight campaign.
It's a blessing in disguise for Tim Tszyu. It's a blessing in disguise for him, really, because I didn't think he was ready to take on Jermel Charlo.
I think Tim is great, but I didn't think he had enough experience for this fight. Now that this fight has basically been called off, and I don't expect it to happen, I don't expect it to get rescheduled, for Tim, it is a blessing in disguise.
Speaking of weight classes, Derek, Crawford and Jermell, what do you think? What happens if they fight?
I know he ain't fighting no Jamel. Shit. If I can't fight him, he ain't fighting Jamel.
but he's called him
I
out.
can't fight you out the loop. Yeah.
But I say he did call him out.
It don't matter what he did. Shit, it ain't happening. Yeah, he could be talking. Yeah, he could, but you call him how you want. I guarantee it's not gonna happen. So.
Those sound bites are from before today's official announcement that Jermell Charlo would not be boxing Tszyu early next year.
Do you get the sense that Errol knew something?
Perhaps he did, though in truth, I didn't give Terrence much chance of getting Jermell in the ring, irrespective of this hand injury. Terrence, who said, "Aw, Jermell, I see why you had your pom-pom so heavy for Errol Spence Jr. He's your daddy, so it makes sense. Now you should have just said that, Maine. My bad, EJ, for talking to your son like that. Let's keep it on you. I'll take you to the fish fry after I fillet you."
I mean, irrespective of Jermel's hand injury, I told you, if Terrence didn't have any luck getting Errol in the ring, if that didn't happen, a Charlo fight won't happen either. They're on the same side of the street. That's Al Heyman and the PBC's stronghold, 147 and 154.
You heard what Errol Spence Jr. said. He was almost celebrating when he stated that Terrence Crawford was out of the loop and he can guarantee that he won't have access to Jermell.
Well, I could have told you that. In fact, I did in several videos. Better still, I wonder what PBC fans are excited about.
Are you keeping tabs on his stuff? Are you taking notes? Crawford versus Spence. That's not happening.
It's not. Thurman versus Spence, that probably won't happen till what, May? June?
The Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia fight. That fight ain't made, in spite of that big announcement they made weeks ago. That fight ain't made. It's not signed. The ink hasn't dried on the contracts because the pen hasn't been put to the paper.
There's been no official announcement of when. When exactly is Benavidez versus Plant supposed to go down?
I think it's supposed to go down in March, but who really knows? We see what happened with this fight. It was supposed to be Jermell Charlo versus Tszyu. That's not happening.
You're a big PBC fan. You love PBC shows and PBC fighters. You tell me, what the hell are you looking forward to? What are you excited about?
It's the best fight they got on schedule. What, Davis versus Hector Garcia? I think that's the only fight they have on schedule.
Yeah, I think that's the only fight that's actually made.
You got guys, they wake up in the morning, log into their social media, argue for hours about how fucking great the PBC is. Al Heyman, he's a fucking genius.
Fucking genius. The whole fucking schedule's starting to unravel.
You actually had people who were not that long ago bragging about the PBC's first quarter.
Oh, goddamn thing's falling apart.
For those of you that have been following this channel long enough, you will know that I've been skeptical for years as to whether or not Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. would actually happen. I had no hope to see Terrence Crawford versus Jermell Charlo.
Look at how long you have to wait before Errol Spence Jr. fights again. Look at how long you have to wait before Jermell Charlo fights again.
And this is value for money? This is what you guys argue about for hours on end on social media?
This fucking shit is what the hubbub is all about.
I'm looking forward to whatever Top Rank and Matchroom put together in the coming year. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Not the itemized list of excuses and extenuating circumstances brought to us by Al Heyman's PBC.